I work for a company that sells fast mover consumer goods. And I was working at that time in our personal care category. You wouldn't think Stephen, of all people, would be working with our personal care brands like Dove. But at the time, I was working on Dove, and Philippines was our fourth biggest hair market. So I got the opportunity to go and travel to Philippines and to be based in Philippines working in that market. So this is February 2020. And we know what was coming in March 2020 was the lockdown. But if I take a step back, this was me at that stage in my mid-20s. I was being sent abroad to a new continent that I had never been before. May I say it was all expenses paid. So accommodation, living allowances, danger pay possibly, like whatever you could expect, it was provided for me to go and fundamentally have a learning experience, because the business didn't need to send me. They didn't need to fit the bill for such a costly experience, but they were essentially investing in my development. So needless to say, it was brimming with adventure. I rocked up in Manila, and before lockdown measures started to be implemented, I literally had the continent at my. The continent was my playing ground, and the first couple of weeks was just brimming with adventure. It was a time of such excitement, such excitement. I think about what I was able to maybe do within the first 2 weeks of landing. I think I ticked most of my bucket list off within the first 2 weeks, and I'm glad, because after the first 2 weeks, walking down the street, people would start to signal, "Where's your mask?" And I didn't know what they were talking about. Where's your mask situation? And 2 weeks later, I'm walking down the same, what was a bustling street of Manila, which is, people consider it the New York of Asia. It's barren. 3 weeks into arriving into Manila, what was supposed to be this crazy time of adventure is barren. And I'm walking on the streets alone, and I'm going, have I really like missed something? Not only am I walking on the streets alone, it was like a scene from a movie. These scramblers, military scramblers, start circling me. They come out of the corner like a James Bond movie, and they're circling me because I'm in breach of lockdown. You know, I'm walking on the streets, and because I was quite far removed from everything, I'm the only guy on the streets, and I'm being circled by these guys on scramblers, military on scramblers, doing sweeps to make sure no one's in the streets. And here I am on the street wondering where everyone is. So fortunately, this is not going to be a story of how God, somehow got me out of prison in Asia. It isn't the story, but I'm trying to set the scene that I find myself in Asia, and it's under military lockdown. It isn't like police lockdown. In the Philippines, it's hectic. It's military lockdown. So that's setting the context, number one, of the extent of the lockdown that I find myself in. It's been governed and been policed, not by the police, but by the actual military, so it's stringent. Second piece of context I want to give is, in Asia, they live to work. So work is part of your identity. You live to work. You get up, you live to work. Whereas often we work so that we can live. We work so that we can have, income, so that we can do things. Whereas in Philippines, you are working, you are living, you are work to live. I've just
Working to live, baby.
You're working to live. No, you're living to work. You're living to work. Your work is such a big part of your identity that when everyone is now at home, and I know many people in South Africa, when you went at home, we kind of put our foot off the accelerator when it came to work. We kind of slowed down. But in Asia, no, that part of life ramped up. And so here I am working for quite a big company, fully funded. The expectation on me to ramp up my work was huge. I remember I would be having meetings at 8:30 on a Friday evening with external partners, so people that didn't work for our company, but were partners, like creative agencies, it being normative to have meetings at 8:30 on a Friday evening. So military lockdown and a heavy, heavy demand on output, a heavy, heavy demand on the work that I was supposed to be doing. One more piece of context before I'm going to jump into the lessons I've learned out of this was that I talked about having a fully paid for phenomenal accommodation. And this accommodation really was great, but it needed some essential services in order to continue to be great. And with COVID, those essential services were obviously were no longer available. Two of them in particular was a laundry service, and as someone in his mid-20s who hadn't used a washing machine before, was essential, okay, as well as like rodent and pest control. Because, like those of us who live in high buildings, we have once a month someone will come and clean your windows. Picture the same in Philippines for pest control. People actually come into your building and they make sure that the piping is fumigated and cleared, because roaches are a very, very big problem in the Philippines. So it's military lockdown, high demand on output and work, and I'm in an environment where everywhere I look, I just see roaches in my small accommodation, and I have no more clothes because the laundry service no longer works, and I had just before the final call for lockdown had given 2 weeks worth of laundry into the laundry service that had shut down, and I don't even have 2 weeks worth of clothes. So what I was left with were 2 sleeping shirts and sweatpants that I'd never envisaged wearing in the hot sun of Manila. So military lockdown, high demand on work, everywhere I look I see roaches. I only have 2 sleeping shirts to my name and these pair of sweatpants on the scorching sun of Manila with me. And now I need to survive. And so what I'm going to chat through are 5 lessons that I learned, and I'm calling the message God in my lockdown, because out of this time that I was in were 5 lessons or 5 reminders, and that helped me see God in a different way, that were reminders that really helped me understand things that I think only once you go through something can you actually fully comprehend the promises and the love of God and the faithfulness of God. Sometimes it's only when we go through some trying times that we get to feel and see that. So, lesson 1 that I got is that identity is not in what we do, but it's in who we are. Back in SA, there was a reason why they sent me to Manila. It's not because they wanted to get rid of me, but it was because they were happy with my performance, and they said, this is someone that we want to invest in. But that wasn't the case in Manila. I rocked up, and immediately I just could not get off the board. So there's a term in cricket where a golden duck, where a batsman just walks out and always gets bowled out in his first ball. Or you may know it in rugby with the Springboks recently. We do everything we can, but when it comes to just kicking penalties, we miss. We miss. And that was my experience. When I rocked up in Manila, someone who was well regarded back at home, doing good things, missing the mark completely in a new land, new continent, high expectation for output, but just missing the mark. And it affected my worth. I was quite well regarded in SA, but now in this new land, locked down, all alone, high demand on work, missing the mark completely. And that's when I remember John 1 verse 12 was a verse that really in that moment helped pull me out of that. John 1 verse 12 reads, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." And so fundamentally our identity starts in the fact that we are children of God. And it was a great reminder. It was I had to be intentional in separating what I was feeling as someone who was missing the mark at work for the first time in his career, had been told, actually, you're not delivering. I was not ready to hear that. What it did to my worth was actually, in hindsight, much bigger than what it should have, because I should have immediately caught that to go, no, my identity is a child of God. It's not in what I do. It's got nothing to do with what I can give, but my identity, primarily, is being a child of God. I talked about being intentional and needing to go take a step back and go, no, don't marinate in this feeling of unworth. Philippians 4 verse 8 reads, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." So in that moment of just, feeling like my worth was being questioned, I needed to be intentional in how I reframed it. I needed to, this Philippians 4 verse 8, of think about whatever is right, meditate on whatever is pure, was a gift that I hold on to now. And that is this reminder that we need to be intentional in how we think, and we need to make sure that at all times we're thinking and focusing on what God has for us and what He says about us. And the gift that I got out of that when we worship God and we proclaim His authority, when we proclaim His power, when we're in awe of His love, when we are in awe of His compassion and His posture of fatherhood, when we do that, when we are intentional in praising and worshiping God, it's the beautiful gift is how the act of doing so, the act of proclaiming God's power, God's love, not only does it give God the glory He deserves, but a beautiful byproduct of is that we start to reshape the situations we're in. Because when we praise God and when we proclaim His power, that power, it stretches across all areas of life. And I realized that even in that small situation I was experiencing about worth, that God's sovereignty, that God's power, that God's unconditional love was as true in that moment when I was questioning my worth, was as true in that small microcosm of life that I was experiencing. And the gift out of that is that no matter what situation I go through now, worship is a weapon. Worship is like a sling that you're putting stones in it. And when things are getting rough, it's through worship that the peace of God comes. And that's a gift that I took away with, and I really want to encourage you with. All right, worship became a conduit for my thoughts. So the act of praising God helped me reshape the way I was thinking, and it was through the act of worship that I was able to reframe that. I was singing through the promises as a child of God. So lesson 1, identity is not in what we do, but in who we are. Moving on to the next lesson, that God is in the highlands and the heartache. So God is in the victories and He's in the low. There's a consistency irrespective of when things are good and when things are bad. Lamentations 3:22 verse 23 reads, Lamentations 3:22 verse 23 reads, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." 2 Corinthians 12:9 verse 11 reads, "But He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I'll boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. God is in the highs and in the lows. And something that I realized that was bittersweet or beautifully ironic was that in that low that I was experiencing, all alone, in Asia, in my small room, roaches all around me, 2 sleeping shirts and sweatpants, in that low, there was an intimacy with God where He was stronger than I've actually ever felt Him. And in that lowest point was an intimacy I had with God that now, vulnerably, I actually miss. I actually miss that dependency, that immediate dependency on God. I remember crazy working hours. I'd go to bed at like 11:30 in the evening, working, and then wake up at like 5. But make sure I started the morning by soaking in praise and worship, watching sermons. It's something I don't do now, and this was a reminder that I needed to do. But I had to do it then. I had to soak in praise and worship. I had to be soaking in the Word of God in order to get through that period of life. And I genuinely enjoyed it. Some of us know that like waking up in the morning to spend quiet time can be difficult. Sometimes we want to go back to bed. But in that season of life, I would be excited to get up and read the Word. I would be excited to worship because it was like I needed to do it in order to function. I needed to have that refilling in order to get through that period. Philippians 4 verse 4 is, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." I talked about that sling. Giving thanks in that moment of waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and giving thanks, being grateful, was a weapon. It was a weapon that helped. It helped quiet thoughts in my head of unworth. It helped quiet thoughts of, I'm all alone, where's everyone, I'm suffering. Worshipping God, finding God in the morning was putting the stones in the sling, that when things got loud and things got messy, the sling was slung. The sling was slung. I hope that's the sling was slung, and the stones that came out were peace. Stones, like I would just, whenever things got a bit messy, being filled in the morning would help me feel like peace. Peace was with me, and that was because of times of refreshing that I would get in the morning. So finding Him in the stillness rejuvenates us for when things get loud. Let me say that again. Finding Him in the stillness rejuvenates us for when things get loud. So lesson 2, recap. God is consistent. He's there in our victories and in our low points. And my caveat is I actually feel like we can find and feel God even more in our low points. And I genuinely, in a weird way, miss that feeling of dependency on God, miss that intimacy. And this, preparing this message was such a great reminder that I shouldn't only have that dependency on God when I'm going through a bad time, but it's that level of intimacy is a consistent intimacy because God is consistent. He is always with us. Lesson 3, and I'm framing this as lesson 3 like I'm teaching you guys lessons, but these were lessons that God was showing me, and I'm just resharing them with you. The importance of community. Lesson 3, the importance of community. Hebrews 10:24 verse 25 reads, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, but encouraging one another. I'll share a quick story. This was probably like 5 months into lockdown, 5 months of no visitors, 5 months of me being in a small room that when I started off was fairly sizable, but I mentioned the roaches, I mentioned the shirts, I mentioned no added amenities, all alone. The only times I would engage with people would be on Teams meetings, and it would just be about work. And I remember just working away, and I saw something move on the table, like someone had walked past. And for us in South Africa, if we're all alone and we almost like see a shadow move past, our immediate reaction is going to be, oh, snap, someone is in my house. I've got an intruder in my house, right? Like if you're working and you almost see a shadow move by, you're going to be jumped up and alarmed. But because I missed and was like void of all engagement, I was happy. I was like, oh, I've got someone in the house with me. I genuinely was happy at the idea that there could have been someone. And it didn't matter if they had wrong intentions. Even a quick conversation with a robber would have been enough. Because I had no community, in that I had no physical community. But actually, fortunately, I was still plugged in to community. I think about some of the best lifelines of sorts, some of the best ways to help pull me out of some of the space I was in, was being able to plug into community. Fortunately, just before hard lockdown, I had bought a guitar. And so when, as a church, we started doing online church, and we started being able to do kind of the worship team would play via Zoom. When I was asked to help play via Zoom and plug back into a community that has been so important to me, that act of just being a part of, the act of being able to participate with, was such a great kind of glimmer of hope. It was such a great reminder of the life that we get to live when we do it with others. I think about like my now wife. Coming out of that time, I would describe our relationship as a companionship, because of how every day, without a shadow of a doubt, we were talking, we were connecting, we were bonding, and that level of engagement is such a help when you feel like you are all alone. I think about my family, phoning my dad, my brother. Those were lifelines, and we often think that we can do this alone, but community is here to strengthen us. We grow together. Being around people, fellowshipping together strengthens us, and we often take it for granted. But believe me, when you are all alone in a room by yourself in a continent that's not your home, there's no one. You realize the power and importance of community. The ironic part, may I just say, is 1 week before I left home, which I'll tell you now was quite an interesting story, I actually realized that there was another couple at the far end of my floor that were great. And actually they were right there. And had I known that there were a young couple, it possibly would have changed the experience. But I will say that this young couple had a really fancy bar. And this bar, they kind of, it was their party trick. They only really touched it when they had guests come over. So I'm glad that they had no guests come over, and I'm glad that I only went over once, because things could have got a bit messy. So I thank God made sure that He protected both parties from that. Cool. So moving on to, that's the power. Lesson 3, the power of community. Lesson 4 is God is working for the good of those who love him. So let me tell you about my journey back home. But before I do that, let me read Romans 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. I read again. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. When they started to introduce flights home, expatriation flights home, at that stage they also introduced some level of freedom of movement where you could now go back onto the streets within certain hours, and there was lots of rules that governed how you could move around. I remember working up until about like 2 o'clock in the morning, having a shower so that I could be on the road by about 4 a.m. towards the consulate, where I was going to try and do everything I could to get a flight home, to try and work with the local embassy to get a flight home. And I must have gone through that process of all-nighters, leaving my place at 4 a.m. so that I could try and make a plan, so that I could try and make a plan to get home, because I needed it. And nothing that I did was working. The closest I would imagine that I've actually come to feeling a level, and I'm not saying it lightly, but actually feeling a level of depression, was in that moment where it just felt like all of the support system around me was not helping me get home. And I remember one night crying, probably about 11:30 in the evening, crying, because we actually have a global mobility team whose responsibility is to make sure that people, talent or resources, are able to move and relocate smoothly. And these guys were silent. These guys had almost forgotten about me, and I just remember busting out some big emails, and just CCing in all of the big bosses I knew, just saying, guys, what's going on here? I feel like you have abandoned me. I feel like all of the resources that are supposedly at my disposal to get me out. I was expecting helicopters when they come through, and I was expecting guys were going to evac me out. That was the promise. We've got global mobility. We've got guys that are, and are just bombing emails, all the big bosses, guys, and all of the guys that I knew kind of had my back, guys that had the power to help put a plan together. And in the process of doing so, a lady was kind of assigned to me. And this lady, Colleen, made it her personal, it was her personal purpose to get me home. And I really do believe that was, I say this confidently, divinely inspired, that Colleen got assigned to me, and the way she worked relentlessly to somehow get me home. It was like, once again, like a James Bond movie. The strings that were pulled to get me home it was only through divine intervention that I could get home, because all of the acts, everything that I had tried to do to get myself home were not working. I think about like often we go through situations and we're praying and we can't feel or see God moving, but He is moving. He is working all things for the good of those who love Him. And we need to remember that He is moving even when we can't see it. He is moving even when we can't feel it. And I remember getting confirmation that I needed to be at this particular pickup point at this particular time. And I'm rocking up there. I've just got my 2 sleeping shirts and my sweatpants and sandals. And I'm rocking there with basically nothing. And others that had been told that this is the spot you need to meet at, rocked up with hazmat suits on. They were fully kitted out, because now we're getting home, guys. We're going through airports, which are obviously hubs of transmission. I'm rocking up with a tattered mask, one of those those disposable masks that you're supposed to throw away, after the first time. I've had mine for 4 months. I'm rocking up with my tattered mask, my sleeping shirt, my sweatpants, and slops, and around me are guys in their hazmat suits. And that picture of so unprepared helped me realize that actually none of my own strength could have seen me through, but it's all God. It's all God, and even when we can't see it, He's moving. Then, lesson 5, we go through seasons, but God goes with us. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. Let me tell you a story about I mentioned I had 2 tattered sweatshirts, and sweatpants, but I also had my sneakers that I had brought with me. And when they, as a way to try and keep sane during lockdown, I would find innovative ways to exercise. So I would in my condo, they had some scaffolding. And in the evenings, I would sneak out, still within the perimeters of the building, and I would do pull-ups on the scaffolding. I was quite creative in how I could do exercise. So the moment they said, guys, you're allowed to do light running on the streets within a certain hours, best believe that I was there with my sweatpants, my 2 tattered sleeping shirts, and I would run. But the Manila sun is aggressive. And I've been someone, you can ask my dad, the sun and I don't get along. I get sunburned very quickly. But because I was held up for 4 months, confined to a room, the feeling of the sun striking your face was such a feeling of being alive again that I would run. And I'm not a fast runner. My wife knows. She leaves me behind all the time. I'm not a fast runner. I don't enjoy it. But given the opportunity to run with that striking sun on your face, getting burnt, really, no sunscreen, I didn't have sunscreen, just getting pummeled by the sun, was such a feeling of being alive after not having that opportunity, that my sneakers that were definitely not running shoes got worn down to the bone. I was basically just there was no soul anymore. And talking about seasons, getting back to the verse, to everything there's a season, a time for purpose under heaven. And the day I left my apartment, the day I locked up those sneakers, I chose to actually leave by the door, because those sneakers they captured that season. Those sneakers were reflected both a time of resilience and a time of difficulty. These sneakers were both they symbolized putting those sneakers by the door, not taking them with me, symbolized the end of a challenging season and the commencement of a new journey. I almost felt like those sneakers that I would wear to hit the road or the hot Manila sun, to get that feeling of life, to help bring control to the day, to say, I can do this, I can get a win, I will push my body in the hot sun, as a way of, not just treading water, but being able to carve out a win in an environment where there was no wins. That's what the sneakers represented. So they were both a representation of difficulty and of resilience. And I felt like the act of leaving my sneakers at the door was just an act of saying, the season has ended. And these sneakers, they belonged in the Philippines. I did not want to take them with me. So when I said goodbye to those shoes, it was a bittersweet moment, because they were a symbol of both struggle and resilience, of pain and overcoming. And so each season that we go through, no matter how difficult it is, it has its own lessons. It also has its own blessings. With every ending comes a new beginning. With every difficult season comes the strength, perspective, and lessons learned from it. I talked about we go through seasons and God goes with us. And that's so important, because no matter where we're going to be walking into, the promise of a better tomorrow, anchored in God's faithfulness, will always keep hope alive. So even if we find like we're in a season where we often use the term like a desert, like a desert road experience, and it's just empty, it's just dry, and it's dry in our lives. Know that God is walking with you. Know that that the promise of God's hope means that in any season we walk through, God is with us. So I said I had 5 lessons, but because you guys have stayed with me until the end of the video, I've got a bonus lesson. Are you guys familiar with YouTube? They'll start off by saying, if you stay to the end, watch to the end, there's like a bonus clip waiting at the end. Well, you guys you've stayed, so I do have a bonus clip. And this lesson actually sums up the 5 lessons. And simply said, God pulls through. God comes through. He is with us. God didn't prevent Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from going into the fire. He didn't prevent Daniel from going into the lion's den. On the boat with the disciples, he didn't prevent the storm from happening, but he was there. He was there with them. When we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, do not fear, for I am with you. My rod and my staff, they comfort you. So linked to the seasons, we are going to be going through some difficult times, but God is with us. He will always pull through. That's so encouraging. And also such a refreshing reminder that in those moments where God is pulling through, those moments can be so sweet and intimate with God. That's the tragic or the beautiful irony, is that in these difficult seasons where He pulls through, we get to experience God in a way that's so real and so intimate that it's tragic that we have to go through it, but it's beautiful that we get to experience God in such a real way. So quick summary, and then I'm going to close. Identity is not in what we do. Lesson 1, identity is not in what we do, but it's who we are. Your worth is not determined by how good you are at work or your accomplishments or your career or how good you are in the roles you play. But your identity is as a child of God. And we must always remember that. We actually need to fight and be intentional in reminding ourselves of that. Lesson 2, God is in the highlands and in the heartache. Irrespective of where we are and what we're going through, God is with us. Lesson 3, the importance of community. We are better together, we're stronger together, we help each other grow, we sharpen each other, we need each other. Let's not forget that. Lesson 4, God works for the good of those who love Him, even when you can't see it, even when you can't feel it. God is working, He is working. Lesson 5, we go through seasons, but God goes with us. So whether it's a great season and everything is just falling into place, God is with you. When it's a difficult season and nothing is falling into place, God is equally with you. And then the bonus lesson, because you guys watched to the end, God pulls through. He pulls through. He pulls through. He will always be with you. And no matter what you go through, in moments when God pulls through, you will only be strengthened when you walk out of that season. Your faith will be strengthened. Your intimacy with God will be strengthened. And so don't lose that in those difficult times. Don't lose that actually God is right there. He's right there. He's pulling through. Thank you.